Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. My game with Gary is finished, and I just thought it's worth taking a look at this because it's an interesting game. Pawn d4, knight f6, knight f3 is completely correct. I've put the engine on. Knight f3 is completely correct, and in the old days, I think people used to say it's more passive than c4, but it's completely correct, and White's done nothing wrong at this point. g6, engine doesn't like it that much, but it's just correct. It just means that one's seeking a more unbalanced game, really. I mean, the most balanced is d5, the second most balanced is e6. I suppose you can also play c5, can you? I suppose you can. We played g6. e3, again, solid and sensible, locking the bishop in, but it doesn't really change anything. In fact, it's an engine choice. The engine choices are c4 and e3, so it's a good move. Bishop there is natural, c4 just going straight back into very familiar lines. Castling is so natural, isn't it? I mean, you're going to castle kingside, right? That's the whole idea. And you don't sort of... White cannot exploit the move order. You don't miss out on anything as black by castling now. So here I chose to go for the Grunfeld structures rather than the King's Indian. I think that's been the theme of these correspondence games. And I think probably engine-wise, well, actually, the engine slightly prefers the King's Indian structures here, but I think in general the engines like the Grunfeld rock more than the King's Indian. Bishop e2 is the kind of most popular move. c5 is kind of the whole point of these Grunfeld ideas. I mean, what else would you play? D takes c4? You could play d takes c4 and exploit the loss of tempo by bishop e2. But c5 is kind of, thematic as it might be. White takes, queen a5. You can also take on c4. I didn't really think about that, but queen a5 is what one tends to do in these things. So you're either going to take on c5 or you're going to exploit some kind of pin. After a knight e4, that pin on the c3 knight becomes critical because it's been attacked 3 times by the bishop, the knight and the queen. So white castles away from it, so we take this pawn and then pick up this pawn. The engine actually has black slightly better here, which of course shouldn't really be happening. Why has that happened? Who knows? Why has that happened? Where could white have... Well, white's played theoretically correct moves. I suppose it says bishop d2 is a bit better. I guess it's marginal stuff. They're tiny sort of... deci pawns, I suppose. They're not centi pawns because centi pawns is 0.01, but but still, black's got a bit of a, black's got something, and actually the stats are the same, which is black's, if you look at it, black's winning more than white. So white decides to go to b3. You can also go to e2, which is a bit more passive. I think b3 is a sensible choice for an attacking player, looking at f7. Black develops the knight, to its natural square. The queen looks a bit odd for me, perched out on c5, but you can't really hit it with anything except knight a4, which isn't really a problem. So the queen can always run to squares like h5 or something, so that's fine. Queen e2 is very natural. It's a sort of Queen's Gambit accepted type concept. Now, I now chose to chase the bishop off that diagonal, so Gary and I agree that that's a good square for the bishop. I chose to chase it off. And then I looked very hard at bishop g4, and it's quite gratifying to see the engine does the same thing. The engine looks at bishop g4 for a while. My concern was the same as the engine's, which is after h3, I think you've got to take on f3 to make it meaningful. Because if you go to e6, you've just given white control of the g4 square and created some love for the king. So you've got to take, and that gives up the 2 bishops for no reason. So didn't want to do that. So I chose to go to e6, which is the engine move 2. Gary played this natural move to swap off the queens, forced the exchange of queens. It kind of makes sense. Unfortunately, there's a wrinkle in it, which is takes, and then that's a fork. So that's winning the exchange. And actually, the engine does think, although Gary then made a really good move, bishop d2, the engine thinks it's basically gone. -6. So it's more than an exchange. Why does it think that? I don't know, engines look a long way ahead, I guess. I think probably white's pieces are still a bit awkward. And so the bishop's kind of blocked in by the e-pawn. And so Gary resigned, which makes sense. And thank you for the game, Gary. I'm sure we'll play again in future, and learned a lot from it. Thanks.